Welcome everybody to Eye of the Serpent Tarot for another deck creator interview. So today I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Ellie Chadwick, who is the creator of an oracle that the type of which I have been waiting for and looking for a long time, and that is a deck that looks at feminine archetypes. So I have a lot of lovely decks in my collection with goddess energy, and I've in fact interviewed deck creators who've done decks like that, and I really love those decks. But I have been wanting a deck that was not just always linking that to a goddess, that it was actually looking at archetypes and that more sort of psychological frame. And hallelujah, here it is. So, this is a deck that is currently funding on Kickstarter. I did mention it before in a community post. You may have seen that. I backed it. That's my connection. I have no affiliation beyond that. I just love to back and support creators, and I really want this deck because I've really been looking for one like this. But what I would say is that I think the Kickstarter algorithm's a bit like the YouTube one, and it's a little bit contrary. And I don't know that it's been that fair to this particular deck. So we're in the final days of the campaign at the point that we're filming in this, and this will publish the day after we film it so that we get those final days. But if you're intrigued by it and you want to get a copy of the deck, you've got to get in quick. So just let you know that the link to the Kickstarters in the description box, all of that sort of thing. We will be showing you some of the cards so you can get to see what it looks like, and we'll also do a collective question or two using the cards at the end so you can see it in action. So that should be great. So, with no further ado, let me welcome Ellie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for being part of a conversation. So, what I like to do usually with these is sort of start with maybe what you'd call the icebreaker sort of question, which is tell me about your spiritual, professional, artistic, whatever kind of combination of things brought you to being inspired to create this deck.
Sure. So, my professional background is in theatre and academia. I worked in theatre for a long time, and in 2017, I completed my PhD, which was in historically responsive theatre practice. So, I was delving into symbolic forms of storytelling, early ritual theatre, and archetypes, and how these are useful most today to access something of the sacred and kind of interconnected communal feeling in theatrical storytelling, and how our culture is seeking this still, despite
Mm.
our secular society with its predisposition to dismiss anything kind of spiritual. Um, and there really is still a seeking of something, whether we call that the divine, the communal, the connection to each other, or the cosmos, or to nature. That's never gone away. And so my research was interested in this, and it was very practical, being working in theatre,
Mhm.
with productions and workshops and so on. And it was really exploring the ways in which we are still often, whether consciously or unconsciously, trying to tap back into a kind of universal, interconnected way of being and of storytelling. So after I did my PhD, I wrote a book which was published in 2023 about these topics. And I have it here. There is a chapter in it on the power of archetype.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've been interested in archetypes for quite a long time, and yeah, obviously continued to write about that in this book, and kind of delving into Jungian philosophy and how uh, that archetypal symbolic storytelling is still so powerful today and has been for a very long time. Um, and meanwhile, and so kind of on the personal side of things, I went through a very traumatic time in my personal life. And as I came out of the other side of that, I was having lots of therapy and lots of support to kind of heal from what had happened. And most of it was EMDR therapy, which is, for those who know, is a kind of way of processing which involves bilateral stimulation. So it's quite a somatic
Mhm.
therapy.
Mhm.
Um, and in therapy, I had an incredible therapist who occasionally would bring in different tools, and one of those tools was working with symbols and archetypes.
Oh,
And
okay.
interestingly, because I've been interested in like
Mm.
archetypes for a long time, but from the kind of theatrical creative storytelling side, um, I found it very interesting to then experience it on the therapeutic side. And the sessions where we use that type of thing, I felt like this almost like a quantum leap forward in my healing journey, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
really did something incredibly powerful. So, it was really interesting. So for me, a lot of the time it was like an animal symbol or archetype, like the lioness or something that came to
Hmm.
mind, and
Yeah.
that energy, that powerful energy, would really add something transformative to the sessions. And so seeing this kind of like these great leaps forward in my own healing journey, and then also kind of connecting the dots and thinking about the creative workshops I'd done with archetypes, and seeing actors make great leaps in character development and that kind of identity of character versus like exploring my own identity through therapy. Um, yeah, I kind of really was drawn to working with archetypes in a different way, really. And so after this like journey, this healing journey, I decided to retrain as a therapist myself, and I'm
Hmm.
currently training as a trauma-informed somatic therapist. Um, and through this process of healing and everything else, I've really gone on a very deep spiritual journey as well.
Hmm.
I've always been spiritual, but I think there's something about, when you go through difficult times,
Yeah.
it really, it takes that journey to a whole other level, doesn't it? And it was really my sort of connection to divine source, God, that really got me through what I needed to
Hmm.
get through. And yeah, so now last year, I founded a company called Wondrous, which is dedicated to empowering women through the power of archetypes, ritual arts, storytelling, my background in that, and also the somatic therapies and all of the tools that have helped me. Um, which are tools that are rooted in ancient practice, but are also very
Hmm.
well researched modern day as efficacious, therapeutic modalities as well. So, in the founding of Wondrous, I really wanted to create an accessible tool that people could take home from our workshops, or could buy separately, or use one-to-one, could use by themselves or in groups, which brings the power of archetypal storytelling into their lives. And so that's where the idea behind the deck was born originally.
Wonderful. I mean, like I think archetypes are so incredibly powerful. It's really interesting to hear that journey and to hear how it worked for you. I do think, I mean, I use both archetypes, but as I say, I've found masculine archetype decks, but not feminine. This is why I want your deck so much. But also, I use things like fairy tales and mythology and so forth, because I think whether we're aware of it or not, we kind of inculcate that in our culture as we grow up. And it particularly in what I've found sort of intense situations like the ones that you're talking about, or relationships, like relationships are always kind of intense. That's where we kind of trigger that stuff and we're not aware of it. And if we can become aware of it, that sort of gives us a perspective and a capacity to find the way to healing or conflict resolution or whatever. So it's so powerful. I think archetypes are extraordinary. So that's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear how you did it. We will talk a little bit more maybe about Wanderers later in the interview. And I might have to talk to you about your book because that sounds really interesting. Even if we don't talk about it in this interview, I might have to talk to you about that offline if it's available anywhere. So, because I love that sort of stuff. So, so you've started to answer kind of what I was wanting to ask next, which is why a feminine archetype stack. But maybe that's the point, like why a feminine archetype stack. And what do you hope that for readers, so the people who come to this, I mean, some of them may well be in sort of therapeutic fields like you're in, but there are others I think who come to this collective. They're spiritual seekers, they're readers. A lot of the ones I think who come to the deck creator interviews are readers and so forth. So if you, maybe you can have a talk about where you see that the feminine archetypes fitting into that kind of world and that kind of thing, what you would be hoping it would bring.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of feminine archetypes, as you say, we're used to seeing the masculine archetypes a little bit more, I think,
Mm.
this journey and everything else. And
Yes.
so part of it, I guess, is sort of to redress the balance. Obviously, with the Wanderous context, I'm kind of called at the moment to working in those sort of spaces with women, and looking at feminine energies and everything else.
Mhm.
And so there's that as well. Obviously, as you say, working with archetypes is in general a very powerful way to explore identity, uncover unconscious patterns, reclaim personal power, um, revealing, our unconscious limiting beliefs and everything else, our,
Mhm.
our shadows, our strengths, um, offering a framework for growth and transformation, and everything else. I think as well in terms of readings, they are brilliant lenses
Hmm.
for decision making and to through which to see a situation. So if we're faced with a challenge or a question, um, they can offer profound insight, I think, into the kind of patterns that we're
Hmm.
dealing with. And by working with archetypes, I think we can gain incredible insight into who we are, who we've been conditioned to be, who we have the potential to become on a personal level. Um, and also, they are universal symbols, so they work on that collective level simultaneously. So in terms of readings, it could be really, really interesting. And I've done some readings with our deck recently for people and um, found that it's just, yeah, it's fascinating how much they resonate and how they land for people. And um, yeah, and I think the fact that there, like you say, there isn't really anything out there
Mm.
is specifically feminine archetypes, and there's a lot of interest in feminine energy at the moment. And as you say, there's some beautiful goddess energy decks and feminine energy decks and everything, but I haven't seen another deck that's specifically looking at the feminine archetypes and the shadow and light archetypes. Um, so yes.
Yeah. So on that sort of point, there are all these sort of goddess oracle decks, and I say some of them are lovely. I mean, I have quite a few lovely ones in my collection, and they're very useful. And you've mentioned Jung. What I'm interested in is sort of like the inspirational well from which you drew your archetypes. And I guess there's sort of like one part of the question is just in general, did you look at goddess decks? Did you sort of do a corollary? Like, you might have, Bast, from Egyptian sort of pantheon, thinking about play and fun or whatever, or was it something else? Was it Jungian, or where that all came from? And then maybe we could have a bit of a look at the mix of ancient and modern archetypes and the light and dark. So, however you want to answer that, however you want to weave it, I think that's one of the really interesting things. You've got modern and ancient, you've got light and dark, and you've also obviously, got an interesting wellspring of inspiration. So tell us about that.
Yes, and in terms of inspiration, I think it came partly from having actively worked with archetypes
Hmm.
before in a theatrical context and
Yeah.
then kind of, leaning into the therapeutic as well. So there's definitely, that was a big source of inspiration. I think as well, I do have some lovely feminine energy oracle decks and some goddess decks and things.
Hmm.
I think really it was sitting with the archetypes that were most resonant, first of all, most resonant in the work I was doing and the work on myself and the work for other people that I was doing at the time. And then sitting with those and kind of just starting to think about all the different archetypes we are handed
Hmm.
by society, by history, by the patriarchy, and just sort of spiraling into, oh, there's this and there's this and there's this. And um, it kind of just, yeah, flooded in like inspiration, divine inspiration or something. And it's just started to kind of all come together. And as I thought more and more about it, I just was amazed to start to list out just how many types there are that we are so used to. If we're thinking about the modern types, so many
Hmm.
types that we are so used to seeing in media and so on that are just they're always there and we are so used to them. We
Yep.
might not kind of think about them too much, but they are very powerful ways of thinking. And yeah, and in terms of the shadow and the light types, perhaps I'll get onto that in a minute. Perhaps I'll talk about the ancient archetypes and the modern
Hmm.
ones first.
Okay.
So that that decision, it kind of came out of the idea of delving into shadow work
Hmm.
around feminine archetypes, and thinking about the fact that while humanity obviously evolves and we move on, there are some psychological patterns shaping our identities that remain deeply impactful from the
Hmm.
past. People talk a lot about the witch wound, for
Yes.
example, which is such a powerful thing that we're still unraveling today.
Hmm.
So we might think, no one's being burnt at the stake right now, but that witch wound is still
Thankfully,
very,
yes.
yeah. Um, but yeah, there are so many there are so many archetypes that are um yeah, so powerful still today that are these ancient types that we've that are so ingrained that we don't necessarily
Hmm.
think about them. But excuse me. So ancient archetypes like the maiden, the Madonna, the
Mhm.
whore,
Yep.
they still cast these long shadows over our psyches, I think. The maiden, while symbolizing potential new beginnings, can also trap women in this state of perpetual innocence and deny them
Hmm.
agency.
Yes.
There's the Madonna revered for her purity
Yes.
and bring energy, but often sort of demanding that self-sacrifice to the point of erasure. And then there's the whore, embodying one level sort of sexual freedom. And I know there are people who have tried to reclaim like courtesan and all these words
Mm.
around the whore type. It's quite a difficult energy to work with still because there's so much shame and kind of demonization and exile and isolation around that and commodification of sensuality and everything else, objectifying women. So these archetypes, although they're ancient, they still are, in our deepest fears, our internalized shame, the societal expectations that still exist. Um, and then in terms of the modern archetypes, I think they, I didn't want to just look at the older, more traditional archetypes because there are so many types that are as I say, present in modern media, that perhaps we might sometimes see as being empowering. For example, the girl boss
Yes. Yeah.
um, is quite a good example.
Mm.
But actually, there's a lot of deep shadow work around that idea of yes, being celebrated for ambition, but also pushing women into exhaustion or making
Hmm.
self-worth conditional on productivity or financial success and things like that. Um, the girl next door, and uh, kind of issues around authenticity and self-expression and self-worth. The good girl prays for obedience and carrying like the weight of repression and silencing her true needs. The bimbo, ridiculed and reflecting the way that femininity itself is often dismissed as frivolous.
Hmm.
Um, there are so many. So as I started to think about it, I could just list so many different types. And I think only by confronting these shadows, old and new, we can really reclaim a sense of power and empowerment. And weaving together the old and the new, the deck can highlight that continuity of feminine archetypes while inviting reflection on the like evolving impact of archetypes and how they operate in our collective and personal um, shadows and help us to recognize where these patterns still unconsciously shape our limitations, our fears, our the concept of ourselves, and encourage us to kind of question what narratives we've inherited, what we want to embrace, and what we're ready to kind of rewrite personally or collectively.
That, I mean, just as an aside, and we might talk a little bit about the choice of light and dark structure as well in a minute, but uh, it's so powerful what you're talking about. It's so necessary at the moment. One of the things that I am increasingly disturbed by, to be honest, I watch a lot of different social and political commentary from both sides of the spectrum because I think that's the only way you get a rounded sense of what's going on. And there seems to be a not so subtle anymore. It started off as subtle, but not so subtle push towards the kind of almost entrapment of women again and the kind of sense of taking away their sort of financial uh, autonomy or their sense of self. And it's wrapped up in all sorts of stuff, but it's really disturbing and it seems to be becoming more and more a thing. And speaking as a single woman who always wanted to be single, had no particular interest in being, married and things like that, I find that really disturbing because I think we should want to be with our partners in life because we prefer to be with them, not because we need economic dependence or any of that kind of stuff. So I find it really disturbing. And I think bringing that back and looking at it and understanding and unpacking it is really powerful. So I think what you're doing is really important. So quite apart from the fact that I want the deck for my readings, I actually listening to you, I think this is so timely. This is so timely and it is subtle, but it is happening. And if you start to watch what's happening out there, you see it and you think that's really insidious. Uh, and yeah, I think something like this, on a cultural level, because I think a lot of this is fought out in the cultural space. Something like this culturally is really powerful. So I just want to say that that really struck me. I also want to have a little bit of a chat about the theatre background and the kind of the narrative story, but I don't want to sort of stop what you were also talking about, which is like maybe then looking at the light and dark, and then we might explore the theatre stuff because I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, yeah, that's really interesting what you say, and I think it is so true. There is still this very insidious current that actually is not so undercurrent anymore. It's actually coming to the surface a bit, which I think, in a way, when things rise to the surface, that means we're ready to deal with
Mm,
them, hopefully,
mm, yeah,
finally.
yeah,
But we may think we are, we may hope and think that we are past the point of shaming or judging people for being what would once be called a spinster, the spinster
mhm,
archetype, or the whore or the crone, or the slut shaming or the
yeah,
ageism. But that stuff is still so prevalent in our society,
mm.
and it is terrifying to think about. But it's so important to confront it rather than shy away from it and say, no, we've moved past these things. Actually, we need to recognize where those patterns are still there, playing out, perhaps
And
in
I,
different ways.
I wonder whether, like, as I say, as a segue into the light and dark, it sort of seems to me that what that kind of thinking tends to create a binary option for women. They're either the kind of the traditional family sort of like, Madonna type, like that, or they're the opposite. Like there's
Mhm.
no sort of like spectrum in
Right.
between.
Yeah.
So even saying nobody has to be like perfect. Nobody has to be, the pillar of femininity. They have to be themselves. Is owning that we both have light and shadow. So is that like that choice to have the light and the shadow? Like what informed that in the deck creation?
Yeah, I think that really you've hit the nail on the head really
Oh,
there in
good.
terms of yeah, in terms of my thinking around and part of why how the deck was born out of these discussions with other people involved in Wondrous as well, and things where we're talking about how still today we put women in boxes,
Mm,
and no person, no woman, no person is one thing or two things or three things. We are so multifaceted, we are so complex, we are so many things at once. And just that feeling of wanting to be allowed to be complex and
mm,
multifaceted. And that's the wondrous spirit, is like this explorational, adventurous spirit of being allowed to try new things and change and grow and be contradictory, because human beings are.
mm,
And so the deck, is really about exploring all those facets of the self that are within us all. And we have all of these, shadow selves, and we have all of these selves that are, the light types, the
mm,
empowering, energies that we can step into at any time, whether that's, the warrioress or the sovereigness or the empress. And in terms of the shadow, light and shadow archetypes, in that sense, through these discussions and thinking, it happened quite organically as I started to think more deeply about the deck and kind of make notes about the archetypes and research and design it. I just began to feel that it was so important that we delved into this shadow work around femininity, feminine energy. On a personal level, I've been doing quite a lot of shadow work
mm,
myself,
mm,
and I'm very drawn to the Jungian philosophy. I find it very, transformational. And so the idea of being able to both acknowledge and accept and embrace those shadowy parts of ourselves through this work, as opposed to continue to repress and shame these
mm,
things, as well as provide that empowering version of all the facets of womanhood or femininity, really appealed to me. Um, and I felt that there needed to be this full acknowledgement of that disempowering side of, femininity that has been handed to us sadly over the centuries, this long history of repression and oppression and all the things we've been taught about ourselves on a collective scale. There's so much work now in the collective going on into reclaiming the feminine, embracing feminine
mm.
energy, etc., which is wonderful to see. But it's not simple work, it's not straightforward work. There's lots to unpack, isn't there? And I've seen decks that we've talked about goddess decks, and I love these the empowering energies of all these goddesses. And sometimes they go into the dark goddesses and so on. But I wanted to make a tool that clearly gives these stepping stones to integrate the whole
Mm.
self and to do that deep inner work, should you choose to. As you say, like obviously it's there to be used for readings as well, but it's I guess it kind of goes beyond that into, there is the potential to then use it to do that kind of deep
Mm.
inner work as well. Um, So
Actually, I love,
yes.
actually, just quickly, can I just say, the way you're describing it, what sort of really struck me as you were talking is the best astrologers I've come across, and I personally I grew up with astrologers. My brother was an astrologer, and I consider he was one of the best of his generation, to be honest. But the best ones that I've sort of found, I watch on YouTube or whatever, do kind of work in that archetypal area. But one of the other things that you find with them is that in any planet, when you look at it, they don't say, well, this is the good planet, like Jupiter's the good planet and Saturn's the bad planet. They don't, they say Jupiter's good for this and it has these limitations. Saturn is good for this and it has these limitations. And I think that's so true of everything. Like it, and that's part of the point of choice. We can only make a conscious choice to be in the light if we understand what the implications of the other is and what's within us of the other. So I think yeah, like everything you say kind of resonates with everything I really like about being in this field. So very personally, I very selfishly want this deck to come out. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out because it just really struck me in the same way that like that acknowledgement of both the positive and the limiting aspects of ourselves and of I mean, that's what the universe is like, and I think it's very reflective. So I just wanted to say that I think you were about to sort of go and say something else, but I am interested in the storytelling and the narrative that you would have got from theatre. I find that really interesting. Maybe because when I read, I kind of look for the story or the narrative.
Mm. Yeah, that's really a really interesting point about the astrology and so true. Um, we have this tendency, don't we, to label things bad and good,
Mm,
and it's not helpful. And I
yeah.
think, you know, talking about shadow and light is a little bit less moralized, maybe, hopefully, and
Yeah.
allows us to acknowledge the more sort of the places where we feel limited or stuck, and that are a bit challenging and difficult, but to hopefully kind of work with those energies and alchemize them rather than shame
Mm,
and put them down as bad. Yes, in terms of theatrical, storytelling and things. So I mean, I think, we're always meaning making as human beings. We're always storytelling.
hmm
Um, and when we work with tarot and the archetypes and the types of tarot, or any deck, it is all about storytelling, just the
mm,
same as theatre is, or any kind of any place where we are constructing meaning about ourselves, our past, our present, our future, and trying to situate ourselves, and orientate ourselves in our lives. And I suppose, my book and my PhD was very much about recognizing that theatre itself and art in general,
hmm
originally in every culture, it comes from a place where people were coming together to connect with each other, to connect with nature, and to connect with the divine,
hmm
um, in celebration and also for catharsis and for release and transformation and rites of passage and just processing what it is to be human
mm,
and the challenges of that. So I think, there are cultures around the world today that still use arts and performance and theatre in this way to yeah, as a tool for collective healing and
hmm
well-being. But in, Western society, we have lost touch with that,
Yeah,
in
which
a
is a
big way.
shame.
Yeah, and we feel the loss of that, I think. And it's wonderful to see kind of this surge in of interest in things like women's circles and things that are marking the new moon or the full moon and things like that, and just getting a bit more in tune with the natural rhythms of nature. People are quite interested in that again, um, in the spiritual community. Particularly, but it's becoming a little bit more widespread perhaps, but it's something that generally in our culture we have really lost touch with, and so yes, I have a really deep interest in storytelling and performance as a tool for collective well-being and individual
Mhm.
well-being, obviously. And that kind of communal connection and connection to a sense of the sacred, whatever that means to the individual person. Um, and so in terms of the storytelling with the deck, the deck will come with a guidebook,
Mhm.
which will, give this the kind of story, the message of each archetype in quite a lot of depth. And then it will have it'll have the messaging for readings, but it will also have like an activation. And that will be like a somatic or storytelling related activity that you can do to activate or work with that
Oh,
energy in a
great.
practice.
That's
Um,
that's brilliant. It's it's
mm,
it's interesting because I think what storytelling does for us is it gives us a sense of the consequences of actions. One of the wisest people I ever met was somebody I worked with once, and she said to me that she believed that one of the things that was problematic in the world is that we're not really focusing anymore or taught anymore about consequential thinking. Like what is going to come? We're kind of very much in the moment, and there's a lot to be said for mindfulness and being in the moment, but I think stories show us, what flows from particular decisions and so forth. And, some of the great stories of history show us that kind of thing. So I love that that's built in because I think like what I like about the tarot is that it has a flow of this leads to this, leads to this. It has a logic to it. And I think like the core story arcs do a similar thing. So I love that you've got that in there. It's a beautiful deck too. I mean, we haven't really talked about that, but it's just gorgeous. You have a artist who did it. You did the original sort of conceptual art, I think, and then she did the sort of artwork with it. I think her name, correct me if I'm wrong, is Melania Guarna Guarnieri. I probably pronounced that wrongly. Sorry. She calls herself Miss Pink Coconut. Maybe correct my pronunciation and show us some cards. Like, talk about that.
yeah, so her illustrations are gorgeous, as you say, and so yeah, I do the kind of like the sketching and the concept, and then she turns them into these beautiful illustrations. I thought I could share some of the kind of um
Mm-hmm.
shadow and light pairs. So this is the siren.
Ooh,
If you can see
it's
the
gorgeous.
lighting's weird and reflecty, but
Yeah, no,
and
you
then
can
this
see
is
it. The
Enchantress.
Enchantress. Oh,
Um,
lovely.
so these are obviously the siren is kind of representative, like the seductive and alluring power associated with danger and temptation and
Femme
potential for
fatale.
destruction. Yeah, the femme fatale exactly. The kind of warning to falling prey to desire and illusion and speaks to the shadow side of desire. And then we've got the enchantress, who also embodies allure and charisma and magnetic presence, but uses her natural charm to captivate and inspire and lead with grace and embracing sensuality as a source of strength and empowerment, balancing
Mhm.
beauty, passion, and power. Um, so that's them. We've got this quite so we've got the crone. We
Oh.
talked about the crone already as a classic. Um,
I relate to
I
her now, given my age.
and and yeah, she's obviously like the crone is linked to kind of this, not just obviously the aging and the fear of isolation and marginalization and aging, but also limiting beliefs and stagnant energies around the concept of female wisdom,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that kind of mature female wisdom and the lack of valuing of that in our society, really. And then to kind of go with her, there's the priestess, like the sage, the wise woman, deep inner wisdom and grounded, mature understanding calls on you to trust your intuition and seek, deeper truth that lies beneath the surface. And yeah, true power coming
Gorgeous.
from within. We've talked about the four
Yeah.
already as well. Um, I feel like this is such an important energy to work with um, because of all the inherited trauma around female desire and agency that we've had to deal with, and obviously objectification and those sorts of things as well. But inviting us to confront societal judgments and conditioning around self-worth and shame. And then we've got the Tantress, the light card, who
Ah.
is representative of the lover.
Hmm.
So free from shame, free from the need for validation, inviting you to embrace love in all its forms, starting with love for yourself,
Hmm.
um, opening your heart to intimacy, connection, vulnerability, and knowing that through love, deep healing and transformation can happen. Um, Share a couple more of these. We've got the angry woman.
Oh, I like that.
Um, yeah, and I feel like we probably can all identify with the angry woman. The suppressed rage
Hmm.
from justice and unmet needs, repression, frustration within, which is a very powerful, anger is a very powerful energy, but obviously female anger has often been seen as disruptive or too much,
Yeah.
and we haven't, traditionally, historically, but also today, been able to express our anger consciously and constructively very easily.
Hmm.
Um, and then we've got the warrioress
Oh, cool.
who challenges that into empowered energy and action, cause you to stand strong in your truth and authenticity, set boundaries, and even when the world around you doesn't accept or understand you, representing that inner strength from knowing who you are and having the courage to be seen for it, unapologetically. So yeah, I could go on with
Yes.
more, but
Well, actually, we've got because you've got this prototype of the deck, so it's not it's like so people know if they're backing the deck, it's not it's going to sort of be zhuzhed up a bit and everything
yeah, so
when
these
it's in its form. It's just
nothing
to give
like
an idea.
these are nothing like our final. These are very rough kind of print off just so that we could start to experiment with
Yeah.
the deck and show it today and do play around with it physically. But our our final printed deck will be gorgeous matte lamination,
Yes.
buttery smooth
Yes.
finish and
Yes.
like really
All the
beautiful.
things. All the things.
Yeah, all the things.
You were just showing kind of like almost the opposites there. Is it built that way in general, or are there sort of some archetypes on either light or dark that are just kind of like almost standalone?
So they all kind of link together in various
Hmm.
ways. It isn't always strictly in pairs. Sometimes there are kind of multiple shadow connections, let's say,
Hmm.
to a light card.
Right. Okay.
Um, there can be sort of multiple expressions of things. One example could be one of the light cards is the actress, the
Hmm.
leading lady, the main
Hmm.
character. And there are a couple of sort of shadow expressions there. So there's the wallflower, the
Hmm.
sort of shy, retiring energy who's minimized and who is, creative and sensitive, but has been made very small.
Hmm.
And then there's also like the diva, the prima donna, who has been seen as too much and too, over performative and everything else. So they are two shadow types that link with that light type. So there are a few different, it's not sort of strictly in pairs. There are different connections that can be made and that will all be in the guidebook. And obviously you can make your own
Yes.
connections.
My
Yeah.
mind just races ahead to like, oh, how I would structure a reading. So I was just asking the question. Um,
Yeah.
Now, you have told us a bit about the Wanderers. Is there anything else you want to talk about in relation to that? Or is it just that people can explore it themselves? I think you have, do you have a connection or a link to it on the campaign? I think you did, but I might be misremembering.
Yeah, it's linked. It is linked on the campaign, and our website is just wondrous.co.uk. And yes, we do retreats and events and workshops, circles that are themed around archetypal exploration and ritual arts, and we delve into archetypal energies in a lot of depth.
Hmm.
And the deck will be a tool that will support these journeys and something people can use and take away afterwards and things and use on its own. But yes, our retreats and so on really delve into specific archetypes or specific areas of archetypes and those energies.
So do people need to be in the UK to join or be involved, or do you do it online as well?
We have online things and our retreats are kind of around the world. So this year
Oh,
we've got
wow.
one in the UK and one in Italy. Next
Ooh.
year we're doing two in Bali. So yeah, they're all over.
I'll have to check it out. It sounds fascinating. And if you ever, like come to Australia,
Yeah.
don't forget us down
Come
under.
there. Yeah, Bali's not too far, I guess.
It's a wonderful country. You'd love it. So okay. So we've talked about all of that. The other sort of general thing before we jump into doing a couple of collective reads is like where else, beyond the Kickstarter campaign, where else could people find you? You mentioned the website. Is there anything else you'd like to mention around that so that people who are intrigued to delve deeper into what you're doing can make those connections?
Yeah. I guess Instagram is a good place to check out Wondrous. So we're at Wondrous Limited Ltd.
Hmm.
Um, so that could be a good place to head. And yeah, our website probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe send me the links to both those and I'll put them in the description box so people have that. Not that I don't think people read the description box all that often, but at least if they hear this, they know if they're looking, they can look there and also at the campaign. So it is always fun to use a deck. That's why it's kind of good that you have it. Obviously, I don't have a copy here, so I can't pull cards. But you have the prototype deck there. So I thought it'd be lovely to pull maybe one or two cards for a couple of questions. So this is for the collective. So for the people who come and who are watching this. So the first question I thought would be really interesting is what archetypes most reflect archetype or archetypes. So draw one or two cards, whatever you feel most reflect the collective's inspirational and creative energy now. And then tell us what you think that says, and I'll just throw in anything that occurs to me.
Okay, draw a couple. Okay, we have got the witch,
Ooh, the witch.
yeah, and the
Oh,
creatress,
wow.
who is a
Wow.
yeah, very creative energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, the witch is a shadow card, and obviously there's a lot of powerful energy in the witch.
Mm.
And we've touched on the witch wound already, a little bit. But yeah, that sort of deep power in tune with nature, um, magical energy, and then, working through the challenges around that being repressed or
Mhm.
suppressed in some way, or feeling that there is judgment around being your true self, or fear around being your true self.
Mhm.
And then creatress is like divine creative energy flowing. Yeah, wonderful archetype to work with, wonderful
Mm.
card. Um, yeah, what do you get from them?
So I partly because I know this collective, this is a really interesting group of people, both from what I see in comments and people who come to me for private readings or send me emails or whatever. Very spiritually advanced, I think, as a group, to be honest. I would take that as kind of connecting into their inner power. And as you say, with the witch sort of thing, maybe something that is repressed or something that they have to kind of, they're a little bit morally ambivalent about, and then kind of channeling that through the creatress as like, what would you create that is of most light, of most good, like using that power and kind of reclaiming it as something that is positive and creative and wonderful, as opposed to something that is sort of shadowy and scary. That's kind of what I would get from that.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah.
So the other question, which is a bit big picture, is what archetypes does the world, whether we're talking globally, nationally, locally, most need from this collective now? If they were to kind of like try and concentrate on an archetype, connect that energy, bring a sort of sense of perception and acknowledgement in the world, what would be the best thing?
Okay. Oh, one's trying to jump out already.
Oh,
Two have jumped out.
cool. We'll go with those. They obviously want to be heard.
These are nice. So the embroideress and the
Hmm.
shamaness. So
Right. Oh,
embroideress,
okay.
yeah, we start with her. Um, I love this one because she is representative of the sacred in the mundane or the
Uh-huh.
domestic.
Uh-huh.
So the kind of daily tasks, or um, often, historically, women's work has been
Hmm.
put down and seen as less than.
Yeah.
And but if we go far back enough, like in Nordic cultures and stuff, things like weaving and women's
Mhm.
work was actually seen as incredibly sacred, and representative of the power of, manifesting something into reality, creating
Oh,
something
yep.
from
Yeah.
apart, from nothing. So the embroideress, she represents, yeah, finding the sacred in the day to day.
Hmm.
And the shamaness is the
Wow.
healer, medicine
Yep.
woman. Um, so that, yeah, healing power and that connection to Mother Earth, and natural, medicine, earth medicine, and that sort of that grounded power, um, and yeah, healing energy.
Beautiful. Like it's interesting when you were holding up the embroiderers, one of the things that like just flashed into my head was the three fates, Clotho, Atropos, and I always forget. I always forget the third one. But the three fates and the concept are like the weaving of the life force and the weaving of a life story and so forth. And then the shaman, because shamanic sort of stuff takes us to our soul and takes us to what is pure in us. So I think, yeah, getting it's almost like use that sort of understanding and spiritual awareness or whatever, almost for a reset. That's what it feels like to me, like a reset towards something it's creating towards the light rather than kind of this, because we are bombarded, and this is the way algorithms work. We're bombarded usually, whether it's politically, socially, or whatever, with bad news. Yeah, and it's
Yes.
like you almost do have to kind of like spiritually cleanse yourself every day just to stay positive. So I think that there's sort of something here about tapping into that shamanic healing ability and doing a reset on what seems to be the fate of the world. Because going back to Jung, I think it's Jung, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's Jung who said the things in our shadow, if we don't deal with them, they externalize and we call them fate. So is
Yeah.
that Jung? Is that Jung?
It is. If
Yeah.
you, yeah, making the until you make the unconscious conscious,
Yep.
it directs our lives, and we call it fate.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if we can actually bring that up and like reset that, then and shamanism is such a powerful way to do something like that, then yeah, like on a collective, on a consciousness level, we can shift the dial, I think. I think that's what that's saying. Or I might be being very optimistic, but I like that message.
No, I like that message, and I think this is like you say, protecting
Mm.
energy, protecting your vibration and your
Yep.
energy, um, and valuing the day to day and the little steps you're taking.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
you know, not devaluing those because they are part of the journey. Um,
Exactly, because the other thing I was thinking as you were sort of like originally sort of talking about the embroiderers is that my theory is that if we all just basically try to be kind, and that doesn't mean, that we all do white lies all the time or whatever, we just try to be kind. If everybody did that, I don't think you could have world wars. Like there's a ripple effect from the individual to the sort of social and the global or whatever. It's because we find all sort of rationalizations and aims and drives that take us away from that. So so yeah, very, very powerful. So I do hope this has whetted people's appetite because I really think this is a deck we need in the sort of collection of certainly from the kind of work I do, but more generally the sort of work that you do as well too, and the therapy and narrative, it all kind of connects together, and I think it's extremely timely. So is there anything that I've missed that you would like to talk about before we sort of say goodbye to everybody?
I think we've covered most things. It's been lovely to talk about the deck and have this discussion. And yeah, I hope that people might go and check the Kickstarter out in our final
Yes.
days. And
Yes, I
yeah,
hope so. I hope so. I mean, like I was already excited about the tech, but I'm even more excited about it now. So it's been lovely to talk to you as well. So thank you for that. So this will go up. It will be published the day after it's filmed so that we get the maximum amount of time left in the Kickstarter. So everybody, if you are intrigued by this, you don't have a lot of time, get in it and back it now if that's something that you want to do. And hopefully in the not too distant future, you'll see this deck being used on my channel. Hardly wait. So thank you so much, Ellie. I really, really appreciated talking with you about it today, and I wish you the very, very best with the campaign.
thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye bye, everybody.